What happens when you die? That's the topic of today's Kabbalah Explained Simply. I'm Marcus. It's a very serious topic. We all contemplate this a lot, and the general conversation divides into a few different areas. One is that people think that we go to some afterlife when we die. Whether it's going up to heaven or going down to hell or maybe purgatory, or there's all kinds of concepts of an afterlife after we die. Some people think that we experience nothingness, that there's simply nothing there, similar to whatever you can remember before you were born. So there's a concept that that's what there is after you die, simply either nothing or a complete unknown. Others consider reincarnation, that we reincarnate as other people or perhaps other animals or plants or even rocks, some other kind of energy that keeps coming back. And this idea of what happens when you die, when we're thinking about it in terms of science, so then that breaks down into how the body decomposes. And then we also have near-death experiences. Lots of people who have experienced clinical death, that their heart stops for a certain period of time, and then they lived to explain what they experienced in that state. And that also comes up and gives a whole bunch of theories to what happens when we die. But ultimately, this realm, when we're talking about our consciousness when we die, not when we're talking about the body and its decomposition like it's described in science, but in terms of our consciousness, there's a big question mark there. As we said, on one hand, you have near-death experiences, which people come back and tell us all kinds of things about what they experience. And then we also have theories, as well as religious beliefs, concepts of the afterlife, reincarnation, and other aspects of consciousness. But what really happens when you die? If you've been following Kabbalah Explained Simply for a while, so you'd know that the answer that the wisdom of Kabbalah gives to a lot of questions is quite different from what's out there in the world. And it's very much like that with this topic too. And that's what we're going to get into in today's Kabbalah Explained Simply. But before that, we'll just get into this. Okay, so when we're talking about the concept of what happens when you die, just give us a second here. Here we go. Let's get into this. So as we said, there's two main categories. One is the near-death experiences, and the other one is the religious beliefs, philosophies, theories about the afterlife, reincarnation, and consciousness. We're going to get into near-death experiences a bit. We did our own research over here. There was a Reddit thread of over 700 comments, all of people who claimed to say all kinds of near-death experiences that they had felt. And it's worthwhile getting into this a little bit just to see the different aspects that are commonly discussed. Out of that research, we found 5 kinds of near-death experiences that kept recurring, that people kept explaining over and over. One was nothingness. Another one was peacefulness. Another one was seeing loved ones, like family members, after experiencing a state of clinical death. Another one is out-of-body experiences, and another one is experiencing some kind of bright light, or either a bright light directly, or moving towards a bright light, like being in a tunnel and moving towards it. Just a bit of a snapshot of each one of these. So nothingness. We took one comment out of all these just that really describes each one of these near-death experiences. So here's one by a Reddit user called Root Dude, who wrote that it was just black emptiness, no thoughts, no consciousness, nothing. Both times I was just not there. It was just all black. I would describe it as when you take a nap, a short nap with no dream. You wake up and it feels like you've been sleeping a long time, when in reality it's only been about 15 minutes. So that's this concept of nothingness, that you enter something that, like this black here, something that's just this blackness. That was one explanation. Another one was a sensation of peace or peacefulness. I woke up in what looked like space, but there weren't any stars or light. I wasn't floating, so to speak. I was just there. I wasn't hot or cold, hungry or tired. It was just a peaceful, neutral kind of thing. So that was one by Monitor Monkey, another Reddit user. Here's one that describes loved ones, seeing people who, like dead family members or something like that. When I opened my eyes, I saw my brother squatting on the pavement next to me. This was odd because my brother died from an overdose several years ago. That was by Schneider7 on Reddit. Out of body experiences, I saw my own unconscious body completely flatlined in the ambulance. I remember the EMT who was in the ambulance with me, whom I did not see before I passed out, had mint green hair and I couldn't remember his name, but I asked for him when I regained consciousness about 3 days later. That was one by Beautiful Flaws. And bright light. I was hit by a car when I was younger and went into cardiac arrest for 6 minutes while I was being airlifted to the hospital. I remember it being noisy when they loaded me into the helicopter, and then everything went completely silent and a bright white light kept getting closer to me. So what do all these have in common? So there's just a few points here. One is that this is something we can learn already from near-death experiences. One is that it gives a sensation of freedom from the corporeal body, meaning that all the desires that we have, desires to receive pleasure as we know them in the wisdom of Kabbalah, desires to enjoy, they all as if diminish. And in this state, the state of clinical death, as it's said, by the way, in the wisdom of Kabbalah, there is no such thing as clinical death. It's a phenomenon that we know of in this world when the heart stops. But when it comes to death, so there's either death or there's life. A state of clinical death is still a state where we're still alive, which is important in how we understand all these near-death experiences first and foremost. So it's a state of freedom from the corporeal body. It does represent a certain boundary between corporeal life and its death. As we said, it's a diminished desire. It's a state of a diminished desire. The desire is inactive at that state. What's the desire? Desires that we have in this world: food, sex, family, money, honor, control, knowledge, and spirituality. All these desires as if take a halt, and we're in this new kind of sensation in that stage. And it's very important to note, my head's blocking it here, but it says not spirituality, not eternity. What we know of is spirituality, and which is an eternal state, which is a state of where we come out of ourselves in, as we say in the wisdom of Kabbalah, in bestowal to others. A near-death experience should not be confused with being a spiritual state, but it's one where, simply put, the desire is inactive for that period of time. And we experience all kinds of phenomena in the mind, psychologically, in such a state. The one, you could say, near-death experience out of all of those where you still might have a question mark in terms of all that, it's the out-of-body experiences, where that is also a sensation in that state where the desire diminishes, we're freed from the corporeal body, and we perceive what's going on seemingly around us with this inner sense that we have. It's an inner sense that we always have in our corporeal lives, with our desires that we take with us on a daily basis. It hides that inner sense that a lot of us have. A lot of people tap into it while they're in this world. But again, it shouldn't be confused with anything to do with spirituality or the soul. All these near-death experiences, just to package them according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, as we said, it's a certain freedom from the corporeal body. It does represent a certain boundary between life and death, and it's a state where the desire is diminished. We have no desires at that state, and this is why we perceive things the way that we do in such a state. With, similar to how in dreams you perceive all kinds of things. You could be, talking to someone who's dead, 1 minute, and all kinds of things that seemingly seem, not in our corporeal daily lives take place in such a state. But according to the wisdom of Kabbalah, it shouldn't be confused with anything to do with spirituality or eternity. It is a temporary psychological state. And that brings us to what then do we discuss as being what happens when we really die, according to the wisdom of Kabbalah. So for that, we're going to get into a little bit of drawing. Let's just move this over here. So, as we said, just to illustrate what we talked about before. So, as we said, we got all these desires, as we know them: desires for food, sex, family. These are our corporeal desires in this world. And as the desires grow, we have desires for money, honor, control, knowledge, and in the final development of the desire, we have the desire for spirituality, which is born, or as we call it in the wisdom of Kabbalah, a point in the heart. So, first we have to understand that all of our development, the development of an individual and the development of humanity in general, it's a process of going through experiencing this in action, experiencing this growth of desire and feeling that desire on all kinds of levels. This desire is an emergence, this corporeal desire is an emergence of what was once a state where we all shared what's called a single soul. It was called the soul of Adam HaRishon. You could say it was a state before all this came into play. It's actually omnipresent, but for the sake of this right now, we'll talk about it as being as a state preceding the development of the desire in this world. So we were once in this one soul called Adam HaRishon. Up here, that soul shattered. It went through a process which shattered. And the experience of corporeal life as you and I know it, our inborn perception of all these desires and pleasures all around us. So that is all this sensation of being separated from that soul that we were once connected to. We were once parts of that soul in an unconscious adhesion with it. And therefore we have no recollection of that state of being connected to that soul in our current lives. And our current lives, including the life of all of humanity over the generations, is all a process of regaining the consciousness of being that one soul of Adam HaRishon that we once had. So all this process happening here is a process of what you could call incarnations, where what's incarnating? It's not really incarnating, but it's a desire that's growing and growing and growing, and each time the soul is undergoing a certain changes. What one set of five senses, sight, smell, hearing, touch, and taste, experiences in one lifetime, at a certain point the desire stops for those. That's a state called corporeal death that we know. And because there's this process of the desire developing to a point where it's regaining consciousness of that one soul that it was once connected to, so it eventually, those five senses that departed, we lose consciousness of that self that we once had in this world, and that desire, which is still growing, it's as if it clothes or dresses a new set of five senses, and continues the process of going through this process of the desire's development until, as we said, until this desire for spirituality eventually appears. This one here. The desire for spirituality is not a full-fledged desire. It's not a desire where we, like the other desires, where if I have a desire for money, it's very clear to me what that desire is aiming at. I can picture money, I can picture making money, and what it means to achieve it. And same with all these corporeal desires: food, sex, family, money, honor, control, knowledge. So spirituality, it appears as a small point for something that's unclear, for something that's unknown, and we and it sparks in us a certain search for that root of the soul. Now, when we attain the purpose of this final level of desire, so we say purpose here, the purpose of this final level of desire is literally the purpose of why we were created, which is ultimately to attain that adhesion as part of that one soul, or you could say adhesion with the Creator. So when we undergo the process of developing this sense, this point in the heart to be a full sense that perceives this soul, you could say up here, it's really what I'm drawing up here is the exact same as what was initially there. So when we develop it in that direction and make it develop to perceive that fully, so that's considered that we attain the purpose of our lives while we're alive in this world. We attained the perception and connection to that soul, to that one soul that was created. And when we do so, then we attain the purpose of our lives. In other words, what the wisdom of Kabbalah says is that the goal here is for us to eventually attain the full perception of everything that there is to perceive in the universe, everything that was made for us to perceive in the universe while we're alive in this world. Until then, we're in a process of this desire is constantly growing and growing and growing until that desire grows to a point when we're ready to embark on that process. The wisdom of Kabbalah is a method that was made specifically for guiding that process, and it's there for anyone who wants to pursue that process in an active manner. But whether a person studies the wisdom of Kabbalah in an active manner to attain that soul or not, that desire is still going to keep growing and growing and growing, and eventually it's going to be pushing everyone to attain this state of perceiving and sensing the soul, or you could also call it the system that we're all in, the system of Adam HaRishon, that one soul that was created. And the difference here is that we're talking about that when we attain that, then we attain the sensation of eternity and perfection while we're alive in this world. This full attainment of what this desire initially emerges as a point to achieve gives us that full attainment of literally everything we can possibly attain in this world, and that makes for our completion. And by doing so, we no longer need to reincarnate. There's an article, by the way, by Rabash, Kabbalist Baruch Shalom Hadavi Ashlag, the teacher of Kabbalist Dr. Michael Laitman, where he specifically writes about that. He says that, what's the level a person needs to reach so that they don't get incarnated in this world anymore? And it's the full 125 steps of moving from this state of having the point in the heart, the desire for spirituality, all the way up to the full attainment of the soul. And until then, we're in this process of, dressing into five senses, through all kinds of different consciousnesses that we have in this period until we eventually reach that. Just before we get to some questions here, you can feel free to put your questions in. We'll get to some soon. So just before that, we'll just mention this in one other way that might be helpful here. So we also have, if we're thinking in terms of consciousness, so you can think of the soul of Adam HaRishon as the collective consciousness. Let's just say that there's this one soul, and it's made up of several parts. The full completion and attainment of that soul of Adam HaRishon is a complete interconnection and interdependence of these parts. So let's just say that they have this connection between them here. And that's what we could call the ultimate collective consciousness, when we have a full attainment, perception, sensation of all this connection between all these parts. And when we attain that, with our own means. Whoops. Yeah. And on the way there, we have our individual consciousness. What's our individual consciousness? So that is, as we said, each one has their own, you could say, we start from as if perceiving ourselves being separate from this, even though we're really parts of it, just we're unconsciously parts of this system, all of us, every single person in humanity. But we start from a process of seemingly being outside of this, with this very limited, narrow consciousness of reality, which we know of as our egoistic picture of the world, a picture which is defined by me receiving through these five senses, which we already know scientifically that they limit a lot of information that they're constantly coming into contact with, and then those five senses further limit that information into the mind, and then the mind further limits that into a picture which is always the most self-serving picture of reality, a picture that's always considering what do I get out of this? What do I get out of this is the base desire that determines the picture of reality that I have at every single moment of my life. And that's a very narrow picture. You could say that's our individual consciousness. The point in the heart emerges within this individual consciousness as if it's rooted somewhere in here, yeah? A conscious point of feeling that connection to this complete system of the soul that we all exist in. So when that point in the heart emerges in the person, that's, you could say, an invitation within our individual consciousness to start drawing this collective consciousness to us. On one hand, you could say we're drawing that collective consciousness, the soul of a Dhammarishon, to us in our individual consciousness, and expanding our individual consciousness. The more that we expand that desire, the more we grow this desire, making that point in the heart bigger and bigger and bigger until it attains the full perception and sensation of its root in this soul of a Dhammarishon. On the other hand, you could also say that we're not just drawing that to ourselves, but we're drawing ourselves to that one soul. So in short, though, we have this individual consciousness, this narrow consciousness, which is egoistic. That's our inborn one. The point in the heart emerges as this seed of the soul. It's not a soul yet. According to the wisdom of Kabbalah, we don't have a soul until we actually attain it, which is a very fundamental point here. We keep developing and going through these incarnations until we eventually get this seed of the soul, until we get this point in the heart, what's called also a reshimo. I'll just write the word reshimo. It's just another word you'll see it referred to. And then when we apply the method and the means to actively develop that reshimo into perceiving its total connection and interdependence with all those other desires that it also shares that connection with, and we start perceiving this space between all these desires as filled with what's called an infinite light, or what you could say is filled with this force of love and bestowal that is hidden from our egoistic sense. So that's called, the more we reveal that and the more we open that up, it's called the more that we rise from, our current state of the reality to a spiritual reality. Or you could also say it's the more we attain that, the more our individual consciousness is opening up until we attain our connection with that full collective consciousness. And that's how it works out until we literally that same point in the heart, we just perceive it in connection with all these other points in the heart, and we feel that space between us. We feel it as a very tangible new reality, something completely opposite to our current reality, because it's one that's governed by laws of bestowal, whereas our current reality, the one that we now feel, is governed by laws of reception. And as we said, there's a means and a method by which we can go through that development in an active way. There's another way we can reach it, but the other way we can reach it is through basically the way that is happening in the world now. It's a way called through an unconscious development towards that state where, for example, in the world today we can see how we become more and more interconnected, interdependent all around the world. It's revealed to us more and more in all kinds of external means. For example, the global economy shows itself to us as connecting us all around the world, and we see technologies connecting us around the world. We seemingly create these things by ourselves, but really what's happening is that on an external level, without doing anything on an internal level in terms of our attitudes to each other yet, but on an external level, it's just revealing to us this state that we're in more and more. However, until we undergo the process of our inner attitudes developing to match the external interconnectedness that's revealing before us. So we experience it as suffering, meaning if I don't change my egoistic perspective of the world to match the interconnected state of the world, which is just becoming more and more interconnected all the time, so I'm going to keep perceiving and developing in a mode of suffering, because I'm always going to be seeing these connections as being something that goes against my egoistic desire, which wants to detach from that, which wants to be by itself. And that's why we have these paradoxes in our era where, even though there's more population than there's ever been in the past, exponentially more, huge amounts of people, where you only had 2 billion people at the start of the 20th century, and now you have close to 8 billion people. And you have, these technologies which are connecting us all around the world, from social media to news, circulating around the world, where you can just pick up your phone and understand what's happening at any part of the world at any single moment. Such intricate, superficial, external connection, yet at the same time we have phenomena such as depression, loneliness, stress, anxiety, all on the rise dramatically as well. So on one hand, it's a huge paradox. How could it be that we're becoming lonelier and lonelier the more that we have so much more population all around the world? It's just one of the phenomena that shows us that this soul, this state of this complete connection, is revealing before us more and more, but our attitude has yet to undergo any kind of steps to match that. So the wisdom of Kabbalah gives us active steps for our attitude to change, to become positively connected with this system that's revealing before us. And the more we apply that to ourselves, the more we can experience this attitude shift in a pleasant way, with consciousness, with awareness, with learning, where we apply ourselves to it as if we're applying ourselves to a scientific experiment, where we literally start relating to means that we can apply to grow this point in the heart within us, this desire to plant ourselves as parts, as positive parts of this one system that we all share, and to experience that in a positive way. That's really what's given for us to do here. So I see that you got some questions flying around. We'll get to those soon. Before that, I'll just play a short little video here, just so you hear a nice voice that's much different to mine. It's actually Rav Leitman talking about what happens after death in an interview he had with Larry King. So we'll go to a few minutes of this, and then we'll get to some of your questions.
I'm Larry King. With me today is Dr. Rav Leitman. He has a PhD in philosophy and Kabbalah, professor ontology, and doctor in medical bioethics. He's been published more than 40 books, translated into 18 languages. Thank you for being with us. Dr. Leitman, what do you believe happens to us when we die?
When we die, our body dies. And if a person didn't attain through life the one's soul, meaning love and connection to others, this is man's soul, then he's got nothing. As he was born an animal, he'll die an animal.
What happens to the soul?
It waits for you to attain it, to get it.
So it still remains?
Yes, but without any connection to the individual, because he wasn't drawn to it.
Do you fear death?
No. Why fear death? Death is only related to this body. There's nothing to it. Just like any animal, any animal, it lives and dies. But within us, there's something that is from outside of us. If I connect to another person in a connection of love, then there's a part of me in that other person. And then if the body dies, I'm already in someone else. I've extended myself and have acquired a part in others, and then I live in them.
Without consciousness, though.
It is consciousness and sensation. These are new tools. I'm inviting you.
I accept. I'd like to learn more.
All right. So I see here we have Julie Neal asking, I've also been learning about near-death experiences that all include being greeted by a loving light and past loved ones. What does Kabbalah have to say about these experiences? Okay, so we talked about this a bit. So as we said, near-death experiences, they do represent a certain freedom from the corporeal body, from our desires, all our desires that, we're made of desires. What we have to understand is that every single moment of our lives, we're getting a desire, an impulse as a desire that makes us want to seek its fulfillment. So when we enter this state of clinical death, when our heart stops and we have a near-death experience, we have to understand that those desires are inactive, and we enter a state where it's experienced as this kind of boundary between corporeal life and its death, meaning the death of that same desire. It's a boundary there. It's still not experiencing what's really in death or anything like that. But let's just make this go away. And the desire diminishes. Look, think about how you, I don't know, you might drink alcohol or something like that, yeah, or what other drugs do, and all kinds of things, and all these kinds of states. Even when you're dreaming, when you're dreaming, and all these states, is already some kind of representation of what it means to feel that our desires are diminished somewhat. Other people do all kinds of exercises to diminish the desire, and they enter into all kinds of perceptions and things like this. What we have to understand is it's simply it's a state that's not spiritual yet. It's not any attainment of anything to do with the soul that we were talking about. It's not an eternal state either. It is a psychological state, and it is a state where we do perceive with some sort of inner sense what's going on around us. Some people, as we said, have access, for example, psychics, etc. They have access to such a sense, more than others, and it can even be exercised in this world with all kinds of techniques. But it's important to understand, if you're asking what Kabbalah says about it, Kabbalah simply says that it has nothing to do with spirituality, all these near-death experiences, that it's just treated as something psychological that's taking place, and it is a perception with a certain sense, other than what we're usually used to perceiving with. But if we understand the definition of spirituality as a state of bestowal, as a state of giving and loving others as ourselves, and through that love, attaining love of the Creator, and feeling this mode of giving and altruism, which is completely alien to us in our current perception of reality. But the more we try to define spirituality in such a way, then the closer we get to how Kabbalists define spirituality, which is a state of coming out of ourselves, but coming out with an intention to give and to bestow, and feeling this full reality, which is full of a whole new kind of pleasure that exists between us. And it's also a very tangible sensation. This is also something. It's not a hazy, unclear sensation. It might sound like that now because we're talking about something that we have no sense for. But when we come out of our bodies by attaining that sense of bestowal, then we attain it as if it's another sense, just as we have a sense of sight and a sense of hearing. And so we attain a new sense, this new desire which is able to feel in this new mode of bestowing, and that's considered to be a spiritual and eternal sensation. And the unique thing that the wisdom of Kabbalah says here that you won't find in any teachings, at least not through our research on this on the internet, is that sense, when we attain it, is something that we can and should attain while we're alive in our world. It's not something that comes after we die or something like that. After what we understand as death, even though according to the wisdom of Kabbalah there is no such thing as death, because as we said, there's this one soul which is always regaining consciousness of itself. But since each one is locked in this individual perception, which is removed from that true perception of reality, so we perceive that there's this point when, these five senses I was born in are born, and then they die at a certain point. All this we just have to understand within that bigger picture, that there's this desire that's growing, and that desire and this reality and this soul that we're all parts of is much, much, much greater than even the biggest kind of perception of myself and the world that I can even attain. Meaning my perception is limited by what makes me feel good at every single moment. I am made of this matter called the desire to receive pleasure, which constantly wants to absorb pleasure into itself, into some kind of empty space within me. And the more we develop, the more this desire grows. And that's why in the beginning, in the very first cave people in the world, they only had desires for food, sex, and family. They were content with just going out all day just to hunt and gather their food and bring it back and eat it. And that's pretty much how they lived. And then, the more we develop over time, the more that desire grows, and we develop, civilizations with all kinds of systems and, money, honor, control, knowledge, all these things come out. The more this, as a result of what? Simply as a result of this desire expanding and expanding and expanding. Our era is characterized by this desire's expansion reaching a certain limit, meaning the corporeal desires reach a certain limit, and at that limit emerges the seed of the soul, which is the point in the heart, this new desire which starts feeling an attraction to something unknown beyond all these corporeal desires that have fulfilled us up until today. And that is all in order for us to start moving toward a state where we can perceive that full extent of the soul, everything that there is to attain in our lives, that full perception and sensation of the soul of Adam HaRishon, all of us interconnected, interdependent as one complete system, which where we perceive, instead of all kinds of other people and other things and nature that we're trying to absorb from and receive from at every single moment, which currently defines our whole modus operandi in this world. Instead of that, we'll move into a perception where we perceive all these connections between us. We perceive this space between us filled with a certain energy and force that we can attain, that we can work with, and that we can invite into our lives more and more and more. And when we move into that and attain it, so that the more we do, the more we attain that, as we said, that spiritual state of Adam HaRishon. And then when we attain the full perception and sensation of it, then there's no need for us to keep coming back into these bodies that we know in this world, and we enter a new state, what's called the attainment of our soul. Let's keep going through some of your questions, because I know you have a lot of them here. Yetze, the Yaga. Did Michael Laitman have a near-death experience? Yes. I say yes because you can even go read articles about it. Simply write Michael Laitman near-death experience in Google, and you'll find 2 or 3 articles there where he's even writing in first person about his near-death experience. He had a near-death experience in, I think it was 1998. Can't remember the exact year. There was a car accident he was a part of with a few students. And he talks about an out-of-body experience he had when he was in the ambulance, where he perceived what was happening around him. And most importantly, just like what we're talking about now, He attributes nothing spiritual to a state. He simply says it's an inner sense of a person. You can see what's happening around you in such a state because the corporeal desires have diminished for a certain period of time, etc., like what we talked about. So, but it's a nice read. As I said, look it up. Michael Laitman, Near-Death Experience. Write it in Google. You'll find there a couple of articles about it where it's depicted. I know this because all this research, we took to him and asked questions about it, and that article came from this research. Richard Lively, does meditation in Kabbalah create a trance or actual rest, sleeping and dreams? Firstly, go check out another Kabbalah Explained Simply that was done recently by Leo. He did a whole breakdown of meditation in the wisdom of Kabbalah. So, if you are interested in it, I recommend going to that one. It's a few videos back in YouTube. So I definitely recommend that for you, Richard. If I'll just answer in a few words, there's a couple of explanations here. One is that there is no meditation in Kabbalah, not meditation the way we understand meditation in this world. You have words, in the Kabbalists that that they meditate all day on a certain thought. The difference between meditation that is discussed in you could say other teachings and the wisdom of Kabbalah, what we have to understand about the wisdom of Kabbalah is, as we said, we're moving to a state where we're moving toward a state of full interconnection and interdependence, meaning that all human society, all humanity, moving into a state of complete oneness, into a state of perfect connection with one another, where we reveal perfect threads of altruism and giving and love between everyone in this world. It seems impossible in our current perception because we see egoistic relations all around us. We see people suffering from all kinds of egoistic situations that are taking place all around us. But what we have to understand, and this is the difference between mostly how meditation is understood in the world and what takes place in the wisdom of Kabbalah, is that in the wisdom of Kabbalah, we don't detach ourselves from society around us. Rather, we use society, you could say, meaning that we use society by understanding that all of society is the other parts of me, it's another parts of my soul. And so instead of isolating ourselves or heading into some kind of trance-like state or something like that, you could say personally, by myself, rather we develop positive attitudes to others in resistance to our innately negative attitudes to others, meaning that my natural desire in relation to other people, in relation to society, is egoistic. I want to use other people for my personal benefit. That's my inborn desire. So in the wisdom of Kabbalah, we counter that desire directly, and we work to develop an opposite attitude to others, to society, and through our work, you could say, in society, we develop a relationship to this complete system we are in, to this complete, as we said, soul of Adam HaRishon, and it's specifically through working to connect that innermost point within each one, that point in the heart. That is the same point where we are capable of making a switch, a fundamental, essential switch from receiving, using others in order to receive pleasure for myself, which is our inborn desire, which we relate to society through the desires of food, sex, family, money, honor, control, knowledge. But when we work on this desire for spirituality, we work to shift that into an opposite intention, one where we, as if use everything that's in my own vessel, in my individual consciousness, we use that in order to benefit others, and we use that to come out towards others. And similar to how the base force of the universe, the upper force, the creator, is a force of absolute bestowal and love, and is operating toward us at every single moment in such a manner. So we try to emulate that and apply that upon ourselves through others, through society, to the creator. So it's a completely, that's why we don't use the word meditation, because it can get confused with the way it's perceived in this world. But it's a very active approach through society to the Creator, and operating in this mode where it's really against isolating ourselves from others in order to do this, because what we have to experience is the perfection through others, and to that full system that we're a part of. Let's see how we're going. We've got 15 minutes left. By the way, we have a Q&A after this. We might just go into another short video with Kabbalist Dr. Michael Laitman also talking about this a little bit more, and then we'll come back to answer a couple more questions. So let's just go into this. This is from an episode of Ask the Kabbalist. So let's take a look at this.
It says, what you see is what you get. Whatever a person sees in this world is what he has. The body, it could be alive, could be dead. However, it comprises no partition between us and the spiritual world. It's my desire which creates the partition between me and the spiritual world. If my desire is aimed in my favor, I see and feel only what my body allows me to feel and see. If my desire is aimed outwards, the body does not stand in my way, and then I feel the spiritual world. This sensation is called the soul, and whatever is revealed inside the soul is called the upper world. And thus, we can do it now without dying or living. One has nothing to do with the other. Now, if my body passes away and I haven't attained yet any sense of the other spiritual world, the feeling of that which is outside me, let's call it the outer body experience, then I don't feel. Why? Because I don't have the vessels for it yet. I didn't prepare. I didn't make this inversion yet. As we said, our body, our animalistic body, the animal level, it doesn't stand in my way. If I have not developed the human level inside myself, which means that I come out of myself outwards, I feel the extroverted reality which is outside me. Accordingly, neither do I get this feeling after this body passes away.
What do you mean? But every person has a soul, no? We know that every person has a...
No, if you don't develop it. A soul means the will to receive, your egoistic will to receive, that you start using in bestowal. If you didn't do it, you have no soul. You don't. You only have the ability to develop it like anyone else in the world. But that's it. And thus, the body, it passes away. And when it passes away, then this point, this kernel, like a spiritual drop of semen, in the meantime remains this way until you feel yourself born in a new body and once again develop like a baby, like a child.
It goes to another body, that drop of spirituality, drop of the beginning of the soul. It goes to some other body if I didn't develop it?
No, it doesn't pass on to any other body. It's not in the body at all. We, who exist in body, along with our bodily life, we get a kind of a sensation of the life of this drop, of the life of the beginning of the soul, from that point, from which we can develop. So the next time we come around, if we will not develop our soul this time, next time we'll have also an opportunity to develop it, of course, under other conditions. It's all corresponding to each and every one's
And let's say I did develop it, and I have a soul. I developed this new perception and everything. What happens when I die? When my body dies?
If you've developed it, then you developed it. Your body, it doesn't stand in your way. You keep feeling life the way you did before the body passed away, because already back there you felt the spiritual life.
What's happening there? What, do I have a name there? Do I have a personality? What do you mean I lose my body? To me, and to most people, I guess, our bodies is our whole world, our whole reality, whole existence. So
that's the problem, that we feel as if everything exists in the body. We need that which exists outside me, not in my direction, but in the other direction. And that will be considered that I feel inside the soul. Whatever I feel by pulling inwards is called this world. Whatever I feel extroverted is called the upper world.
Let me ask like this. Can I see this world without having a body? If I don't have a body, and I have a soul?
No.
No?
No, because we're talking about vessels, abilities. Like, if I don't have eyes, can I see?
Right.
No. So I need eyes. The same. These are certain qualities through which I feel the reality called this world. I have to acquire such qualities now in which I will feel an additional reality called the upper world. The attributes through which I feel this world disappear. Then I stop sensing it.
And I feel just that other spiritual dimension. That's
I feel the spiritual dimension, and of course I also feel this dimension, but not the way I feel through our senses. I feel it through the spiritual dimension because the upper degree includes all the lower degrees. Our degree, the degree of this world, is the lowest degree. And thus, I don't feel this world in terms of bodies, but in terms of forces, potentials that can grow. Being in the soul, I feel all the rest of the potentials and souls, whoever has already acquired a soul, whoever has not yet acquired a soul. I feel these things in terms of spiritual forces and not their clothing. And the reality is in this world, which is the substantial volume.
so my perception right now is something that is not real, even. It's
Not real. Non-real because towards spirituality, this entire reality, which stems from the will to receive for oneself, does not exist. But we were given an opportunity, the ability to depict for ourselves what does the will to receive for oneself mean, so that from it we can constantly increase our will to bestow, the desire to come out of ourselves. But in truth, this reality does not exist because the upper light, power of bestowal, the general force of bestowal, encompasses all of reality.
this upper light. This is what we call the Creator. This
Yes.
It's the same
Yes.
force.
All right. Well, look, I see that there's a lot of questions here. Before I move on with them, I'm just saying that we're about to have a 1 hour long Q&A session on Zoom in Kabu. Just follow the links in the chat or in the video description, and then you'll be able to join that. So keep that in mind, because we won't be able to get through all these questions now. And yeah, you can just ask your heart away over there on this topic or on any topic that you want Kabbalah's answer to. But just a couple more while we have a bit of time here. Coach Katie is asking, if there is a continual process of reincarnation, if you will allow for the individual pieces of Adam HaRishon to reunite in time, why is the population growing instead of diminishing? Okay, so the population's always growing because there is one desire that was shattered, and the more that desire grows, the more it's expressed in population growth. And that's really it. We have to understand that the desire is constantly growing, and so one of the expressions of the desire's growth is more and more and more population. That's the whole purpose of it. And the interesting thing with population growth is, like, for example, in our times, we have this concept of overpopulation, right? You might hear this word thrown around a lot, that the overpopulation, it's a problem, and we have to think, how to reduce the population. This is another concept that also comes from our egoistic approach to reality, that it's only since we perceive the world through an egoistic lens, where I want to use others and nature for my personal benefit, and then I perceive all this increasing population as something that's interfering with me, as something that's disturbing me. We all have had those dreams at one point in our lives where you wake up in your dream as if and walk around the streets and you're the only one who exists. You walk into shops, in and out, and and it's as if no one else exists in the world, and it feels like such a peaceful, serene thing. You can take whatever you want in the shops and do whatever you want out there. So it's a sign of our ego operating and showing us a certain picture that it wishes to perceive. So this concept of overpopulation, according to the wisdom of Kabbalah too, there is no such thing as overpopulation. What we fail to understand is how much that is that there's a certain amount of you could say suffering that humanity has to endure at a certain period of time, and the more population there is, the more that suffering is allocated to more and more people. Meaning that if there was actually a lot less population, let's say you cut off 7 billion people from the world right now and you only have 1 billion people, what you'd fail to understand is how much you'd actually be suffering a lot more, and we have no way of really understanding that. But that's how it's explained in the wisdom of Kabbalah, that this whole concept of overpopulation and the whole idea that all these people in the world are causing more of a problem, and how do we deal with it? It all just comes from perceiving in a way where we perceive egoistically, whereas if we change our attitude to others from egoistic to altruistic, if we undergo this shift that we're talking about, perceiving others as all parts of my soul, then we'll see that nothing happens for no reason, and we would completely justify all this population, and we'd find that there's no problems with climate that comes from all this population that's growing, and there's no problems with all kinds of scarce resources as we perceive it. There's no problems with land. You can even see in the world there's so much land that's still uninhabited all around the world, and it's just another concept that comes from our ego growing, and the population also grows, and several people start thinking that it's this huge problem, all this population around us. But if we undergo this shift, then we'll actually see how it's a perfect situation, and all that's lacking is our attitude to undergo a correction, which is what the wisdom of Kabbalah guides. That's really all we have time for. As I mentioned earlier, we are going now into a Q&A session. I'll be there. It'll be more intimate. It'll be on Zoom. You can open your cameras. You can ask your questions in person, or you can also throw them in the chat in Zoom if you wish. So very much look forward to seeing you all there. As I said, follow the links in the video description and also in the chat to get there. Just so you can see where it'll be. It'll be at Kabu. That's the name of the website where it'll be. So we look forward to seeing you there. You can ask any questions you want on this topic or on anything you want Kabbalah's answers to. And it's been great. Once again, Kabbalah Explained Simply. I'm Marcus, and we'll see you all next time.